All right, what's going on, Mountain View? We are getting into our first lesson today for our class. This one's going to be on truth. Now, if you've heard me ramble on about truth before, don't tune me out. This is different. This is different content, and I've got a whole bunch of verses and stuff I want to get into. That's another conversation. I want to focus primarily on John 18:37 and 38, and that's what I put in the bulletin as being our kind of our core verse for what we're going to be going over. And understanding what truth is, coming to a definition ourselves of what truth is and why that's important when we're answering questions, because without truth, all the rest of this is kind of meaningless. Now, if you have heard me babble on before, I love to ask people what is truth and hear all their definitions if they have one. In about 20 years of asking people this, rarely do people have an answer. If they do, they don't usually coincide with other people. However, if I could go back in time, one of the few places I would really want to go and hear the answer to in particular is when Pilate questioned Jesus around truth in particular. So ask yourself, do you have an answer to Pilate's question to Christ? Let me ask that question here really quick. John 18:37 and 38. "You are a king then," Pilate said. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. And then we know he walked away, and that was the end of it. When Pilate asked Jesus what is truth and walked away, he walked away from the single greatest authority on the most important question. That was out of the Truth Project. I think it was Robbie who asked that question. I think it was absolutely critical. I would have loved to know the answer. So if I could go back in time, I'd say, stop, go answer the question. Of course, I don't speak Aramaic or whatever they were speaking at the time. Couple of verses here for us talking on truth out of the scriptures. 1 John 4:6. "We are from God, and whoever knows God listens to us, but whoever is not from God does not listen to us. This is how we recognize the spirit of truth and the spirit of falsehood." If I can't answer what is truth, I question, how can I truly answer, how can I know that I believe in Jesus? How do I really understand the truth claims of Jesus? A line out of a song for today that I absolutely love, "Oh, how quickly lies become the truth." And I think we're seeing that in our own world in many different ways. Jesus answered truly, or I tell you the truth, or truly, about 25 times just in John's gospel alone. And that's by my count. I'm sure somebody's got a better estimate, but just by kind of looking through it. But clearly truth is important. Christ uses it in his answers, and I don't think it was just used as part of their grammatical or social ways of answering. Right now, commonly is to hear somebody say something like, "Let me tell you the truth," or "Honestly, were you not telling me the truth before?" I don't think it was one of those. I think Christ is, again, defining the truth. John 14:16, Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Philip 4:8-9. I am probably going to bring this verse up several times. I apologize. But over the next 6 weeks, I love this one. "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." 1 John 1:8. "If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us." Ephesians 6:14. "Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist and the breastplate of righteousness in place." John 1:14. "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling place amongst us. We have seen his glory, and the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." What I'm trying to establish here is the Bible talks a lot about truth. Jesus talks about truth. Jesus is truth. He not only claims that, but it's also made claims about him. And therefore, what he says is true. Now, that doesn't really define the paradigm of what is or isn't truth, But when we're talking about the truth claims of the gospel, those are just a handful of verses. There's tons more out there. And as I've encouraged in class, go find your own. Find other verses, find other passages that you want to look at, bring other truth points to it that align with the truth of the gospel that we all believe in. I really do think when we're having a conversation with somebody where we're holding up the truth of the scriptures, whether that's a fellow brother or sister in Christ, an agnostic who maybe we're trying to witness to, or it is somebody who is just trying to chuck rocks and they're asking questions because they want to know something, we have to first establish truth. Now, it doesn't mean that that's what they have to believe. I'm not advocating that. Of course, that's what we'd like. However, we have to come from a point of truth and stick to it. And we have to, at least for the sake of the paradigm of the questions and the conversations, align to a truth definition, even if we don't fully agree. Otherwise, we end up in situations where people will say, well, that is your truth. That's not my truth. Or that is a truth. No, it is the truth. And if our conversation is to progress at all, I think that's a key piece that we absolutely have to get into. It is the bedrock of any statement or conversation, and it's going to prevent us a lot of times from talking in circles. Not only ourselves, but when we start to go back and forth with people and we get into these conversations, because if two truths are colliding, I often picture a air-to-air dogfight. If anybody knows anything about that, you'll know what I'm talking about. If not, frequently when airplanes go to dogfight, they merge, coming head-on to each other, and they will usually instantly both turn into this circle, and they do kind of a spiral of death. And I think conversations can go that way a lot of times because one person is coming from one truth, the other one's coming from another truth. And if we can't get that person to side with truth in the conversation, we at least have to be able to adapt and identify the truth that they're coming from in order to best convey the actual truth in our answers to them. I've talked a little bit about paradigms in class. I'm going to talk about it again. I'm not trying to overuse paradigms. I think they get overly used here, but I think it's important. Whenever we start to break down truth, you can get into an infinite number of theories, but I have found it always boils up into two main categories. And again, this is 25 plus years of playing this whole game of truth. It was my whole point for conversion. I was obsessed with understanding how two truth claims that collided with each other could both be true or not. I honestly wasn't looking to find salvation or God. I was trying to understand truth. And that's where the passion comes from this. It all boils up into two pieces. Either an objective truth, something that supersedes us, supersedes mankind, supreme moral law by a supreme moral law giver. It was defined. These we find to be self-evident. Or it's subjective. And so you start to hear well, that's my truth, or that's your truth, or what's true for you, or, we have conflicting truths. You start finding that in the subjectivity. And again, both of these can be split up in an infinite number of ways, but that really is what it boils up into. And if you really want to spin that dreidel with me, come on over, we'll have a conversation, because this is one of those places where I can spend 45 minutes talking about truth and everybody's eyes kind of roll, and please don't do that. So I'm all in, but most people aren't. When we're talking about an objective truth, right, we see God as a supreme moral law giver, giving us a supreme moral law that is good, righteous, and true, that he speaks truth in all things. There isn't a place where God told a white lie or finagled something into a different truth. Fun side fact, that was actually the primary way that I identified in my youth that Islam was false, because of a lie according to their telling of it. So this isn't even their use of, I didn't read it in Arabic or whatever. They can bear this with me. It's actually Allah's lie that made it where I realized that they were wrong, because it would be Allah's fault that I don't believe in him because of his lie. We don't have that in the scriptures, right? We have a perfect truth. Or the world gets into a subjectivity of truth. And I think Lecrae knocks it out in an old song of his, in Simplification. And he says, if what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me, What if my truth says your truth is a lie? Is it still true? And that takes all the great philosophers and tons of conversation and boils it down into one line out of a song. But I think it's a perfect illustration and summarization of subjectivity truth, because if we're playing that game, we're not making progress. One key place I'm seeing this, especially in our society, is around words and word definitions. When we change the definition of a word, or we create a new word to supersede the definition of another word, we then try to influence a different truth, which would be a lie in that case of that word. And so we see new words get created, or new definitions for words that we've held true for a long time. Herman Johnson, he was a politician in the late 20s, early 30s, and he's kind of famously quoted as saying, the first casualty when war comes is truth. If you've seen me out and about before, oftentimes I'll wear a t-shirt that says truth is the first casualty of oppression. I'm a big fan of that as well. But some of the key places we see this just in our modern times, right? In abortion instead of murder, or fetus instead of baby, or mostly peaceful protest while we're seeing a city on fire behind somebody. We start to gaslight and finagle and twist or use different words to supersede it. So we've got to be very cautious in our wording. And I often recommend sticking to older words and older definitions in sticky situations. I stole this off of Dr. Del Tackett in the Truth Project. He always talked about referencing one of his favorite Webster's dictionaries. Forgive me the year, I think it was like in the 1850s. It's an old dictionary. The words are still modern enough, but the definitions were the original intention. And I think that can really help us. So when we're talking about some of these key or complicated issues, whether it's scripture or societal or whatever, using the right language prevents us from getting stuck into a paradigm of a different definition of the word that we're trying to accomplish. Sorry, my computer shut off here, and I'm not going to be doing a ton of edits in these. I'm just trying to make them effective for you, though. God, truth, Christianity, do we have the same definitions? Are we using the same types of words? And if not, and we're in a situation where we can't use some words, I don't know about you, but in some of the places I work, I'm not allowed to use certain words that are truthful because somebody has defined them as harmful, even though they're innocuous words. But it's because they've created a different word, given it a different definition, and decided my original word was hate speech. Couple of key takeaways. Let me get you out of here. Thanks for listening to me go on. What are the points? What do I want you to bring to class next time? Again, this is not a fully encompassing piece on truth or everything that you need. Go do a little bit of work yourself. Put some work into this. Take some notes. Bring some different verses. Even if you like one of my answers, by all means use it. Put it in your own words. Make it authentic, as we talked about in the first class. So your key takeaways here. Can you define truth and convey that to others? And I find frequently, even amongst believers, sometimes we doubt a little bit if we fully understand God's truth and if we really believe it. Take some time in prayer and think on that if you are in that boat. If not, do you have a way of defining it? I also see that quite a bit where I know it, I don't know how to say it to somebody else. Put that into words. It's a good time. Instead of singing in the shower, maybe talk it out in the shower. Nobody else can hear you, and you can kind of work it out for yourself. If conflicting truths are possible, what's the point of the conversation? So if you get stuck in a point in a conversation of either conflicting truths or a lack of alignment in a truth statement purely because of verbiage, I want you to have some thoughts around how are you going to mitigate that. And so some of the examples that I've talked about before is not mixing our paradigms, not allowing the whataboutisms from the first class that we talked about, or if those are happening, at least understand how can I shift to better help communicate that to those people. Again, our end goal here is not to win the argument. Our end goal here is to be able to testify to the truth. My last takeaway for you: how to use the Bible to know and share truth. This is your homework for the next class. If you've got other verses, other ways of using the Gospels, the way God's used it for you in your own life to convey His truth and the truth of the Scriptures, bring those so that when we spar, you're going to get a chance to put those out there a little bit. Try that, see how that works in the safety of our classroom. Thanks, everybody, for listening to me ramble. We'll see you on Sunday.